Kayla Harrison fights Holly Holm at UFC 300 April 13th in Las Vegas. This is making the big headlines right now because Kayla, two-time Olympic gold medalist, recently just signed with the UFC specifically to make this fight. Now, how is this fight going to play out? Well, I truly think that Holly Holm will get off some hard shots and wind up taking Kayla out. But let's break this down. I'd like to take a look at three criteria. One is the size difference, two is the technical skill difference, and three is the mindset difference between Kayla Harrison and Holly Holm. So let's start with the size difference because that's kind of the obvious, right? Kayla won her two Olympic gold medals in the women's 78 kilogram division. 78 kilograms equals approximately 171 pounds. Now, there's no 171 pound division in MMA. There's not a 165. There's a 155 in some promotions like PFL, who, let's be honest, I think since they signed Kayla, they would have accommodated whatever weight she probably wanted, but 155 was probably the highest weight they could go and kind of have recruit enough opponents for her. Because conceivably you could ask a 145 pound woman to, hey, look, step it up, we're going to pay you a little more money, you're giving away a little bit of size, but you're getting paid. So it's conceivable for a 145 pounder to step it up to face Holly at 155. To face Kayla at 155, but it's too much of a reach for a 145 pounder to say, hey, fight her at 165. Like, that's not going to happen. Now, the other thing with that is that for all of her judo career, Kayla had to weigh in the morning that she competed. So typically at senior nationals for judo, the weigh-in will be, the unofficial weigh-in 6:30 in the morning, the official weigh-in 7:30 in the morning, and you could be on the mat competing as early as 11 a.m. So you have just a very short turnaround time in terms of the weigh-in to the actual stepping on the mat. So how much you want to dehydrate yourself, that's up to you, because you just got to decide, how much can I afford to squeeze myself dry the morning of? Now, so let's take a look at Kayla's weight. So she fought in PFL and won the featherweight, the 155 pound championship, and then did lose it once to, I think the lady's name is Larissa Pacheco. Sorry if I got your first name wrong, but arguably Pacheco, I think, could easily make 145. Kayla did make 145 and fight at least once at 145 with Invicta, and she fought Aspen Ladd, who some of you may remember from USC. Kayla fought Aspen Ladd at 145 on an Invicta card. Now, it still looked to me like there was a little bit of a size or there was just a little bit of a differential there. But the big news is that she's going to go down another 10 pounds to face Holly Holm. And Dana says, oh, she's done a couple test weight cuts. She will make 135. And Chael Sonnen chimed in and said he doesn't believe that she actually did a test cut, because his definition of a test cut means not only do you make weight, but a few hours later or sometime later in the day, you got to put yourself through a tough sparring session to emulate the fight. Because it's one thing to hit your weight, it's another thing if you can hit the weight and perform. So this is, I'll assume good intentions on the part of Kayla Harrison and Team Harrison, that they do intend to make 135. Now, on the flip side of that, this is something that's done in boxing all the time, so this will not be a strange notion to Holly. But sometimes people, like Floyd Mayweather versus Marquez, sometimes boxers have zero intention of actually making the contracted weight. Also, J.C. Chavez Jr., his weight, the contract that he signs is absolutely meaningless in terms of the weight because Floyd and Chavez Jr. are such megastars. We know that the promoter and the commission will bend the rules for them, and basically you could weigh whatever you want, and then it just becomes a question of negotiating with your B-side opponent how much they want to get in terms of monetary compensation. Floyd's intentional weight miss was the motivation for Manny Pacquiao to include a clause in his contract for Floyd. Like, I think it was like a ridiculous amount. Like, we're going to fine you $1 million per pound. Because whatever the clause was for the Marquez fight, I think it might have been $500,000 that he wound up having to pay. But like for Floyd Mayweather, the $500,000, he just didn't care. It was just the cost of him doing business. And the thing is, when you pull that one on your B side, even though your B side, Marquez and Pacquiao are both megastars, when you pull that on your opponent, it's very difficult for them to turn down the fight, even though you didn't make weight, because they just spent the last however many months, 3 months, 4 months of their life dedicated to this fight, spending money to prepare for this fight, and they're counting on whatever purse they're supposed to get to cover all those expenses and take care of, their expenses for probably the rest of the year, maybe the part of the following year. So they're really hard pressed to just be like, oh, you know what, you missed weight, screw it, we're not going to fight. Like, I don't need that money. No, they need that money, and so does the rest of their team. So it's a real squeeze play, dirty move for someone to pull. But it's not unheard of, so it wouldn't shock me if Team Harrison is just counting on making a weight miss. Like, oh, we'll come in at 138. We'll come in at 140. I would say that's about the max you could kind of push, because if you're over 140, well, then why didn't you just contract the weight for 145 and let Holly know up front? Because Holly has fought at 145. Now, on the other side of this, if I was part of Team Holm, I would absolutely assume that this is a potential scenario and work it out, and maybe even work this into the contract, which, they've already signed. I don't know what the terms are, but you'd want to talk about this with your team up front. Well, if Harrison comes in 3 pounds heavy, okay, we'll still take the fight, but we want X amount of dollars. If she comes 5 pounds heavy, maybe it's even more. And then if it's more than 5 pounds heavy, so she's over 140 on the scale, do we even want to take the fight? And, at that point, that's between Holly and her team, whether they, but I would say that they should have they probably have all of this plotted out, maybe pound by pound, what they're going to do. Because Holly is a boxing veteran, and so are members of her team. This is not unheard of, where people make intentional weight misses. So there's that aspect of gamemanship with this whole weighing in at 135. Now, in terms of just raw frame, for sure, Kayla has that advantage because she's walking around in a bigger frame. But by the same token, Holly has faced bigger opponents, like a woman named Megan Anderson, who's incredibly tall. Now, of course, Megan's a striker more than a grappler, but still, Holly has faced larger opponents. So whether or not the Harrison size difference comes into play will depend on whether Kayla can get Holly to the ground. I think it plays much more of an advantage on the ground with Kayla, because that's her game, right? and she can always, if she's got top position, she can lay and just try to exhaust Holly on the ground. Now, as far as Kayla being bigger and striking, unfortunately, her striking's not good enough that even if she has the frame size difference, that it's gonna play a big role in terms of the striking. In terms of the clinching, tied up, maybe, again, if Kayla uses her size strategically to wear Holly out, say if she's got Holly's back against the cage, or that kind of thing, she can just impose her weight on Holly and try to drain Holly's battery. So for criteria number 1, size, Kayla clearly has the size advantage on paper. But let's take a look at technical skill. So this is the sort of classic grappler versus striker. But let's take a little closer look at that. Because I don't think there's any question that Kayla's probably she's a superior grappler. She's a world-class judoka. And that Holly is the superior striker because she's a world-class boxer, world-class MMA fighter, and just knows she has both hands and feet. Like she can take you out with either her hands or her feet. Remember, Holly was a kickboxer before she was a boxer. I'm guessing she went into boxing just because there was more opportunity for women's boxing at the time than there was for women's kickboxing. But then when women's MMA opened up, that was sort of perfect for her. She could go back to her roots with the kickboxing and start learning jiu-jitsu and grappling and just round out her game to become a complete MMA fighter. Okay, so let's just start with the striking. So this is where I think there's a bigger differential than there is comparing the grappling. Because in my opinion, if we say Holly's a mid-level black belt in striking, I mean, just to be conservative, right? Let's say she's a 5th degree black belt in striking, which she's fought at world class for years, so I think we have to at least give her a 5th degree black belt. And she's shown that she can be effective with both her hands and her feet, so we've got to give her the 5th degree black belt. If that's her level, what's Kayla's rank? Well, it's nowhere near black belt level. In fact, it's really low beginner level. Depending on your belt system, I mean, she's not a raw beginner, but she's not that much beyond a raw beginner. So in judo, we have 6 colors like white, yellow, orange, green, blue, brown, black. So we call white, yellow, and orange the light color belts, and green, blue, brown the dark color belts. So in my opinion, Kayla's striking is very much at a light belt level. She can go through the motions, and she goes through the motions on camera the same way Ronda would go through the motions on camera, kind of sort of fiercely shadowboxing or fiercely hitting the mitts. But and to the untrained eye, that it might look passable, but if you really know what you're looking at, Kayla's mechanics with her hands are not good. And that's the same thing with Ronda, and it's primarily because they transitioned from judo to boxing, and it's very, very tough for a judoka to learn to keep their elbows in. It's tough because as judokas, we keep our forearms like basically parallel to the ground, so our elbows are sticking straight out to either side, and that's because we want to block our opponents from getting a grip on our uniform, either in the front or on the back. So if you keep your elbows out, it makes it harder for your opponent to reach your uniform, and it also like sets you up to have your hands in the right position to try to grab their uniform. Tough habit to break. So when somebody yells at Kayla, keep your elbows in, she'll probably drop them 2 inches, and in her mind it feels like, oh, I'm keeping my elbows in. Because relative to where she would have them as a judoka, yeah, her elbows are closer together, but they're still super wide from a boxing point of view. right? So there's two problems with, not having your elbows all the way and, with your forearm vertical and having your elbows pointing to the ground. Two problems. One, you're not able to defend up and down, right? Body and head. And the other problem is that when you go to throw your punch, if your elbows are out, you're just dissipating all the power away. It's not going straight forward anymore. You want your elbow down so that when you extend your fist, everything's going in a spiral motion, but it's going in a straight line. So Kayla's still working on that, I can tell. Second thing with Kayla's striking is I don't know what her striking regimen is. Now, plenty of us don't always post everything we do when we train. I sure haven't. I hit the bag and I've been lifting and I haven't been posting just because it hasn't been convenient for me to, set up my camera to shoot that stuff and post it. So for sure, I don't doubt that Kayla is training way more than she posts on. But I'm not so sure that she does all the stuff that nobody wants to do with striking, like work the heavy bag. And of all the bags in the gym, the heavy bag, whether it's the long banana bag so you can kick or it's just a standard boxing heavy bag for punching only, it's imperative that you do bag work. No matter what, no matter who your trainer is, no matter what your style is, you gotta hit that darn bag to condition your hands and your shins and your feet, and also to develop the right type of power for striking. You're not going to develop power hitting mitts. You're not. You're supposed to do mitts to help develop the combinations, the rhythm, the precision, and just understanding the flow back and forth between offense and a defensive movement and then a counter punch or counter strike. Mitts are really for polish, but they are definitely not just for developing or repetition and power mostly. So that's a question I have for regarding Kayla Harrison's striking training. Now with Holly, okay, there's just no questions about that. She's a world-class striker. She knows how to train for that. Her team knows how to train for her. She's been doing that for years, if not decades, and there's no reason to believe she'd suddenly not do that in preparation for this fight. So in terms of striking technique, for sure Holly has a major advantage. Now let's take a look at the grappling. Well, clearly Kayla is a world-class judoka, right? So there's no question there in terms of judo throws. But what about Kayla's transition from judo to grappling where there is no uniform? Now here's the interesting point, and it is a point of comparison between Kayla and Ronda. So if we take a close look at Kayla's judo depends a lot on her getting what we call an overgrip. So she's a right-handed fighter, so she's leading with her right hand. You lead with your dominant hand in judo. So what Kayla's trying to do is reach over her partner's left shoulder and grab their uniform behind in the upper back area or upper shoulder area. This way she can kind of crunch down on them a little bit, and she can control their upper body, either bring them down and up or move them to the side. But that's a very dominant grip. The other grip that I've noticed Kayla favors is like under, it's not really an underhook, but it is under the arm. It's more like under the arm, but way low on the waist, around the back, and then she'll grab the uniform just a little bit above the other person's waist. And you can use that grip to go in for what you guys call a hip toss, which I can't stand. It's a hip throw. It's ogoshi. So you can pull your partner in, and as you circle your hips in and then bend your knees a little bit, pop up, and they'll go over. In any case, my point is Kayla's judo depends very much on her being able to grab the uniform. By contrast, let's look at Ronda Rousey's judo. Ronda is a left-handed person, like a bona fide lefty. So she's leading with her left hand. That means now her grip on the other hand was not really uniform dependent. She would kind of sort of headlock or clinch the person, and then go in for her throws. So that, I think, really served Ronda well when she transitioned to MMA, or if she were even to do a jiu-jitsu competition. I don't know if she ever did. I'm guessing she probably doesn't really want to now at this point, but it would serve her well in a no-gi situation because she's not relying on the gi to get her leverage. Kayla is relying on the gi to get her leverage for grappling. So now, let's take a look at how Kayla makes that transition to MMA. She can't get off her favorite judo throws because there's no gi. So looks to me like majority of her takedowns or throws are shooting wrestling moves, right? Shooting in for the single or the double. It looks like often she just shoots straight in for a double and just tries to blast a person down on their back. Now here's the other interesting point with this. At one time in judo, a double leg was allowed. It's actually a judo technique called morote gari, and when you take your black belt exam, it's fair game for the examiners to ask you to demonstrate that throw on either side. Morote gari is basically a double leg, but in judo competition, it used to be allowed, but then it got banned. I don't know what year exactly because I've stepped away from the sport for a long time now. But yeah, you can't do any techniques where you touch your opponent below the belt. So for her whole entire judo career, Kayla never trained anything where she grabs or touches below somebody's waist level because that would get her an automatic DQ in judo. So for sure, she didn't just practice it just for the fun of it, because you don't want to train yourself to accidentally do something that's going to get you DQ'd. So my point is, Kayla's actually newer to these double leg takedowns than Holly, because Holly transitioned to MMA like long before Kayla did, and let's assume that, this is sort of MMA 101. It's one of the first, those are the first takedowns you learn, single legs and double legs. So, ironically, Holly has more mat time shooting singles and doubles than Kayla does. But let's take a close look at the double, because I really think that that's probably Kayla's best chance to get Holly down, is to shoot in suddenly for a double, get her on the ground, and just say top heavy because she has a size advantage, and then go for the submission. Is she going to be able to do that? We'll come back to that in a moment. But here's another case in point, because there's no question who's a better striker. That's Holly. There's no question who's the better grappler. Probably Kayla, right? Just intuitively and instinctively, she has more overall grappling experience. But who's the greater fighter at their lesser? So in other words, is Holly a better grappler than Kayla is a striker? And I think the answer to that is yes, most definitely. Holly's a better grappler than Kayla is a striker. Again, because Kayla's striking mechanics are so flawed, and Holly does actually have fight experience getting women on the ground. She countered Ronda when Ronda tried to throw her, and she actually threw Ronda. Now, mind you, she'd also tagged Ronda up, so Ronda may have not, been 100% present. But nevertheless, Holly has executed judo throws. I don't want to call them takedowns. Holly has executed judo throws in MMA competition in the UFC. So we have to give Holly that overall advantage, not only as a striker, but just, that she's a better grappler than Kayla is a striker. Okay, so I think that Holly has the technical superiority more so than Kayla. So third point, let's take a look at mindset. Um, Here again, I feel like Holly Holm is has got the superior mindset. Why? One, because she has far more experience in MMA. She has more experience in the UFC, so she's used to those bright lights and the attention that one gets in the UFC. It's certainly much more than you would get in PFL or Bellator. Um, Not only that, but Holly has fought, in my opinion, she's fought way tougher competition than Kayla has. If you take a close look at the opponents, it sort of looks like, I won't say that Kayla's been fed opponents because they set up that tournament so she couldn't actually get fed opponents specifically. But overall, it always looks like Kayla has a bit of a size advantage. So again, I think there's a bit of this, like let's get these 145ers to fight her at 155. Maybe let's get a 135er to fight her at 145. But clearly, Kayla's the A side, so that means, the promoter's going to sort of cater to her a little bit. Plus, she's got Ali Adel Aziz, the real astute manager, so I'm sure he negotiates the right fights for her. Now, Holly's used to being the underdog, right? Look, nobody, I didn't pick her to win against Ronda. I thought Ronda would get her down and armbar her. But kudos to Holly. That was a huge moment for her. She kept it together focus-wise. She never broke. She never lost her focus, even in the lead up to that fight. And then just executed perfectly. And that's another aspect of Holly Holm that I really, really admire, is that she's got incredible patience in the cage. Take the time to watch some of her fights and just notice that she just works her way up in terms of throwing the combinations and adding power. She doesn't just come out like guns blazing. She slowly picks somebody apart. She gets her jab down. She gets the timing down. She gets the placement down. And then she'll start dropping in her straight left hands. Remember, Holly's a lefty, so she's going to come with her jab is her right hand, and her power shot is her left hand, or reverse punch, whatever you want to call it. Same thing with her kicks, right? Holly's got great inside oblique kicks. She's got that famous rear round to the head. She's got question mark kicks. She's just as versatile with her kicks as she is with her hands, so she can mix them in fluently and fluidly. It's not something that she has to think about. She's not a boxer that says, oh, okay, now I got to add in a kick. No, she was a kickboxer who subtracted her kicks so she could box. Now she's just kind of going back to her roots, and it's a conversation, right? Like your kick just flows into your punches, or vice versa. So my point there is I feel like mentally she's just so seasoned to be patient and wait for the right moment to seize an opportunity, to seize an opening. And I don't think she's intimidated. Look, she wasn't intimidated by Ronda. She was not intimidated by Chris Cyborg. She wasn't intimidated by Amanda. She stepped in there. She did get KO'd, but she wasn't intimidated. She's stepped in there with a much tougher competition than Kayla. So that's got to be, like a mental advantage for Holly. And that's, I don't know. To me, I feel that in terms of, say, a fighter's identity, I feel like Holly she's identified herself she's embraced herself as an MMA fighter for years. Whereas I feel like, in a sense, Kayla is still somewhat hanging on to her judo identity. She's still using Judo Kayla, right, as her username, IG, whatever, right? And I do get it, you did something unbelievable. You won 2 Olympic gold medals. Nobody has ever won one gold medal for the United States of America ever in judo, and you won two. So that's huge, and no one can take that from you. And that's just, it's boggling and amazing. And props to Kayla for doing that. But when you step into the cage, you got to let go of whatever your quote unquote primary sport is or was. I feel like Holly did that like years ago. Like she knows she's an accomplished boxer and kickboxer, and she like let go of that and said, okay, I'm going to be an MMA fighter, and I'm going to learn this grappling stuff and this jujitsu stuff. And I feel like it shows in the ring because she's able to flow from her striking into the grappling and the ground game. So I think that in terms of the mental aspect of the game, again, I feel like Holly has the upper hand over Kayla Harrison. So how do I see the fight actually playing out? Well, as I mentioned before, I really feel the only way for Kayla to get the W in this case is to somewhere near at the beginning, before Holly has a chance to get warmed up or anything, right? Get a read on her, just shoot for a blast, get Holly on the ground, and then stay top heavy, bide her time being top heavy, and then go for a submission or go for the ground and pound. That's possible. But I think the way I see this playing out is Holly taking her time, keep maintaining distance, which she's excellent at, just slowly picking at Kayla without trying to do anything. Without trying to do anything major. Just working your jab left hand, and then throwing in, adding the kicks in there, mixing it up until she can get that opportune moment where maybe Kayla shoots and Holly counters, or somehow, it gets to the ground. I feel that Holly could drop Kayla just because she's a superior striker, or she could drop her and then go straight to ground and pound. That's another way it could end. I don't really see Holly necessarily getting the sub on the ground, although if she's battered Kayla so much that Kayla's sort of incoherent, that is a possibility. But I think it's far more likely that Holly patiently bides her time and picks at Kayla, keeps her at bay, defends the takedowns, and then as the fight wears on, starts to pick up the frequency and the impact level of her strikes to get Kayla out, or at the very least, get a decision in just being able to dominate Kayla on. Now, it's no surprise to Team Holm or Holly that it's imperative for Kayla to shoot on Holly. So my assumption is that they've already been working on how to stuff Kayla's takedown and maybe even counter it off of Kayla's stance and the way she likes to attack for the double. I'm assuming that as soon as she even started thinking about, as soon as the fight was proposed to her, they probably started their game planning on specific grappling counters for this fight. The thing is, because Holly has some basics already in terms of the grappling, she can just hone in on specifics for Kayla. On the other hand, for Kayla, she doesn't have really enough fundamentals with striking to really gain anything in the next 8-10 weeks in order to prep specific for Holly's striking. There's just no way you're gonna learn enough in 10 weeks to deal with a world-class striker. So, at best, Kayla can try to minimize the errors she makes and just max out on her head movement and blocking and just getting her eyes sharp to avoid getting hit or kicked as much as possible. Now, I'll give you a couple more reasons why I think Holly has advantages. One is in terms of Holly's patience and her timing. And on the other side of that, Kayla has this sort of odd rhythm that she employs when she tries to feint with her strikes. I'm sure somebody told her, look, you gotta feint, you can't just stand there and throw punches. So she does this sort of, it's not really herky-jerky, like Tyson Fury's herky-jerky movement actually sets up his jab quite effectively because it is so off-kilter and off-beat. But Kayla's up, sort of, she moves her head up and then she sort of semi-level changes. She goes up and down, and then, but it's all in the same rhythm and at the same tempo. And while that might throw off some people, it's not going to throw off a striker like Holly. And particularly, Holly is so patient that's what she does. She's patient enough to just figure out, learn somebody's rhythm and tempo, and then she'll shoot her shots in there in between the other person's punches or movements. That's how she gets to her opponents. She's not looking to unload in one big huge power shot. She'd rather slowly chip away at it, and then eventually she'll wear somebody down. And it looks like it's just one shot, but it's the wearing down, and it's her honing in on the exact timing when she's able to take somebody out with like that head kick to the head with Ronda, or with a straight left straight down the pike, which she also landed on Ronda. So there's that aspect. Kayla's feints are almost too predictable for somebody like Holly. And here's a second fact. Holly is a true southpaw. She's a lefty. So she adopts a southpaw stance as a striker, which means her right hand is forward, right? Her dominant hand is her left hand, and that's to the rear, so that when you turn your hips and rotate, your power hand has that much more space to accelerate, and you land the rear hand, or the reverse punch, if you will, with a lot more force than you can with your jab. Now, Kayla is going to have the same stance. She's going to have her right foot forward. She's going to be in a southpaw striking stance because that's a righty judo stance. Judo people lead with their dominant hand. Now, it's a whole nother video to talk about switching from judo to boxing, and in my opinion, you don't stick with your judo stance in boxing per se, and it's primarily because you want your dominant hand to be the reverse punch. Two reasons. Well, one, because it's your power punch, but also because, let's say I'm right-handed. Because my right hand is my dominant hand, that means I use it for every little thing, right? Like writing, like opening doors. You just literally use your dominant hand for more reps throughout the day, every day of your life. So my theory is that the finer muscles in your dominant hand are more developed. And what that means is you're able to form a fist better with your dominant hand than with your non-dominant hand. And that's crucial to avoid injuries when you are throwing your dominant hand and landing it on something hard like somebody's skull. For example, Paul Malignaggi is a converted southpaw, or he's converted orthodox, really, because Paul Malignaggi is actually a lefty, and he was switched, I guess, right from the start to fight in an orthodox stance. So he's infamous for having multiple surgeries on his right hand because he kept damaging it. Now, my question, and it may have been the same even if he took a southpaw stance. He might have also wound up damaging his left hand just as much, but my point being that maybe if he had his dominant hand in the rear, which is his left hand, maybe he would have been able to form a better fist, a tighter fist, and maybe that would have avoided all his hand injuries in his right hand. Who knows? We'll never know. But when we're looking at a true southpaw versus Kayla, who's adopted the southpaw stance but is actually a righty, it sort of stands to reason that Holly's straight left is going to be better than Kayla's straight left, simply because that's Holly's dominant hand. That's not Kayla's dominant hand. And the reason, as I was sort of explaining before, the reason that a judo person wants their dominant hand forward is because you're going to take a grip with your dominant hand, and that higher grip, that lead hand grip, is crucial to you controlling your opponent. Well, it's not going to play a part in MMA because there's nothing to grip with your lead fist, right? There's no kimono, there's no uniform to grab. You want to punch with that lead hand. So it's a different feeling altogether. So that's why I think that even if we look at these small details, Holly still has the advantage. So in the end, even though Kayla has a size advantage for sure, and has a bit of a grappling advantage, when we take everything into consideration, I feel like Holly just has more experience. She's got a better sort of outlook, a more well-rounded outlook, and I think she's got a more realistic outlook and knows what to expect under the bright lights in the UFC cage. So my prediction is that headshot dead. I think Holly is going to wind up either landing her patented rear roundhouse kick to Kayla's head, or she'll tag her up with jabs and straight lefts enough to either get the decision or drop her and finish her with the ground and pound. Tell me how you think this fight's going to wind up. Holly Holm versus Kayla Harrison. Please put it in your comments below. Thank you for watching.